On a clear night, you can walk outside, look up, and see a sky that seems calm and empty. Yet behind that quiet darkness hides a mind-bending fact. Astronomers estimate that the universe contains something like 10 to the power of 22 stars, a number so huge it barely fits in the human mind. Many of those stars have planets. Many of those planets may have oceans, clouds, and continents. And yet, in all of human history, we have never confirmed a single alien neighbour. No crashed starships that we can reliably study, no public stash of extraterrestrial gadgets, no verified message from the stars. So before we ask what humanity will do when we meet aliens, we have to tackle a harder question together. We have to ask what we even mean by life in the first place. That sounds simple at first. You know the difference between a rock and a cat. One sits there unless something pushes it. The other moves on its own, eats, breathes, and reacts when you disturb it. Trees grow and stretch toward light. Bacteria multiply and spread. Even without a textbook, most of us feel that we can point to some things and say they are alive, and to others and say they are not. When scientists try to turn that gut feeling into a definition, they usually reach for lists of properties. Living things are made of complex, organized structures that keep themselves going. They use energy from their surroundings. They grow and develop. They reproduce so that lineages can continue. They respond to changes in their environment. Over generations, they can evolve, changing to fit their world better. That cluster of ideas seems to work very well for almost every creature you have ever met. But even here on Earth, this neat picture starts to blur at the edges. Think about viruses. A virus can be unimaginably tiny, far smaller than the cells in your body. On its own, floating in space or sitting on a lifeless surface, it does nothing. It does not eat, it does not move itself, it does not reproduce. It is more like a package of instructions wrapped in protein. Only when it enters a cell does it hijack the machinery inside and turn that cell into a factory that copies the virus. So is a virus alive? Some scientists say yes, because viruses carry genetic information and undergo evolution. Others say no, because they cannot run their own chemistry without help. The debate has gone on for decades without a final verdict. And viruses are not the only awkward cases. Prions, which are misfolded proteins that can spread their shape, and even certain computer programs that copy themselves, can behave in ways that feel lifelike, without fitting comfortably into any definition. You can already see the problem. If we argue about whether something is alive, even when we can hold it, weigh it, and put it under a microscope, how will we decide what counts as life light years away? When we look at a distant planet through a telescope, we will not have test tubes or petri dishes. We will have only faint light, a few gases in an atmosphere, maybe a hint of surface colour. Will that be enough to say something is living, or will it always feel like a guess? Right now, every living organism we know shares a deep family resemblance. Under the huge diversity of shapes, they all use the same basic toolkit. Life on Earth runs on molecules like DNA and RNA that store information, proteins that do the heavy lifting, and membranes that separate inside from outside. The chemistry is based on carbon dissolved in liquid water, working within a certain range of temperatures and pressures. That shared pattern gives us comfort because it suggests life might have a recognizable fingerprint, but it also tempts us to make a risky assumption. We tend to imagine that life everywhere else must look like life here, just with a few cosmetic tweaks. Maybe purple instead of green. Maybe a different number of limbs. That may be true. Or it may be that our specific recipe is only one way among many that the universe can assemble something that behaves like life. When science fiction writers dream up creatures made of rock or plasma or exotic liquids, they are tapping into a real scientific question, even if the details are wild. To sort fantasy from plausible possibility, scientists lean on a very simple idea from physics and biology. Nature is not a designer that can produce whatever it wants. It works with what is available. The materials, the energies, and the physical laws of a world push living systems towards certain solutions and away from others. Over time, the structures that survive are the ones that work in that environment. Everything from the shape of a finch's beak to the length of a giraffe's neck is a record of that long struggle. This is where natural selection enters the story. Imagine a population of simple organisms that are all a little different. Some handle heat better than others. Some move a little faster. Some digest food more effectively. If the world around them changes, those differences become a matter of life and death. The ones that cope better are more likely to survive and have offspring. Those offspring tend to inherit the useful traits. Over many generations, small differences stack up into big changes. A clumsy fin becomes a powerful flipper. A simple light spot becomes a detailed eye. Look at your own body for a moment through that lens. You have a skeleton that holds you up, muscles that move you, a digestive system that breaks food down into fuel, and a nervous system that gathers information and makes decisions. None of that was planned in advance. It was refined over billions of years as countless ancestors lived, reproduced, or failed. You are the current result of physics and chemistry exploring every possible mistake and keeping the rare combinations that worked well enough to survive. Once you see life this way, you can start to ask a new question that matters a lot for aliens. If different creatures live in different environments but face similar challenges, do they end up solving those challenges in similar ways? Here on Earth, the answer is often yes. We call that convergent evolution. The classic example is the eye. The ability to sense light is so useful that eyes have evolved independently many times in unrelated groups. The camera-like eyes of a squid and the eyes in your head do not share a recent common origin, yet they work on similar optical principles. The same pattern appears with wings. Birds, bats, and many insects can all fly, but they come from distant branches of the tree of life. The details of their wings differ, yet the overall idea is the same. If the atmosphere can support flight, and if moving through the air helps you find food or escape danger, evolution tends to discover the trick of building wings again and again. Even echolocation has evolved separately in bats and dolphins, because both live in environments where sound is a powerful way to feel the world. All of this suggests something important when we picture aliens. If there are intelligent beings elsewhere who build tools and explore, they will likely live in worlds with their own constraints. They may not look like us at all, yet some elements could be familiar because the problems they face are familiar. Any species that constructs delicate devices may need some version of hands, or at least flexible appendages, to hold and manipulate things. They may need good sensors for light, sound, or other signals. They will need bodies that can move, repair themselves, and handle energy. Take a moment to imagine that. If you had to sketch a tool using creature for a planet with low gravity and thick air, what would you draw? Maybe tall and thin, with long limbs adapted for gliding or soaring. For a high-gravity world with thin air, you might imagine something short and stocky, with sturdy legs and a powerful heart to push fluid around its body. On a dark planet under constant cloud, eyes might give way to more sensitive ears, or feelers that sense electric fields. Different planets, different solutions, but always tied back to the same question: what works here? Orbital shapes matter as well. On a planet with a nearly circular orbit and a tilted axis similar to our own, seasons may be gentle, giving ecosystems time to settle into stable patterns. On a world with a very elongated orbit, temperatures and light could swing wildly across the year. Life that survives there might need to hibernate, migrate, or enter protective states more extreme than anything we see on Earth. Intelligence that arises in such a world might grow up with a constant awareness of deep cycles and catastrophe. Temperature and pressure can also reshape what life looks like. In the crushing darkness at the bottom of Earth's oceans, animals grow in strange ways, and familiar rules about size and shape start to bend. In polar regions, some insects and amphibians have antifreeze molecules in their bodies. In deserts, plants and microbes do everything they can to hold onto water. Some organisms can lose almost all of their water content and wait for years, barely active, until conditions improve. Those strategies show how creative evolution can be when pushed hard enough. As we catalogue these possibilities, it is tempting to feel that we are slowly closing in on a definition of life that will work everywhere. Yet the more we learn, the more we notice exceptions and edge cases. Some organisms share genes across long distances through viruses or other carriers, blurring the lines between individuals. Some communities of microbes function almost like a single organism spread through soil or rock. Are we counting the individual cells or the whole network? When does a group of cooperating parts become a new living thing in its own right? This is not just a philosophical puzzle. It has direct consequences for how we search the universe. If we define life narrowly as something that looks and behaves like familiar Earth organisms, we will design instruments and missions that look for that specific pattern. We will bias ourselves toward water, carbon-based chemistry, and certain temperature ranges. That improves our chances of finding cousins of our own biology, but it could blind us to stranger but still living systems that operate outside those bounds. On the other hand, if we define life so broadly that almost any complex system counts, we risk fooling ourselves. A planet with chemical gradients or storms that maintain patterns over time might then be misread as alive. We might waste precious observing time chasing illusions, so scientists walk a tightrope. They need a definition that is strict enough to be useful, but flexible enough to handle surprises. Right now, we do not have a final version that everyone agrees on. We have working descriptions that depend on context and purpose. You can feel the weight of that uncertainty when you imagine the moment of first contact. Suppose a distant planet shows signs of a gas in its atmosphere that on Earth is almost always produced by life. Is that enough? Do we declare that we have found aliens? Or do we hold back and say we have found something interesting that might be biological? Suppose we drill into the ice of a nearby moon and see tiny structures moving under a microscope. Are they alive? Or are they products of non-living chemistry that only mimic behaviours we know? As you think about these questions, notice how your own instincts lean. Do you find yourself trusting a strict conservative standard that demands many lines of evidence before calling something alive? Or do you lean toward a more generous view, where any self-organising evolving system deserves the label? Our answers will shape the way we respond when ambiguous data arrives. They will also shape how excited or cautious we feel about claims of alien discovery in the news. Through all of this, one thing remains clear. The discovery of life beyond Earth, even something as simple as a microbe under alien ice, would be one of the most important events in human history. It would tell us that life is not a local accident. It would mean that the universe has, at least twice, assembled chemistry into something that can grow, adapt, and persist. That alone would transform our understanding of our place in the cosmos, and it would raise new questions about how often life continues on to intelligence and technology. Yet we are not there. The night sky is still silent to our ears. We have no confirmed fossils from Mars, no alien bacteria in our labs, no decoded message from another civilization. What we do have is a growing sense of how tricky the question really is. Before we can judge whether the cosmos is empty or teeming, we have to refine our sense of what counts as a living presence and what kind of signs such a presence might leave behind. So when we finally turn our telescopes and probes outward, into our solar system and beyond, we will carry our definitions and our biases with us. We will decide where to look based on what we think life needs. We will decide what counts as convincing evidence and what demands more tests. And in the background, the stars will continue to shine in their billions, indifferent to our debates. The first step toward answering whether we are alone is not to listen harder, but to decide what we are really listening for. Once we have a rough sense of what counts as life, the next question is where to actually look. The stars are romantic, but they are far away and painfully faint. Our own solar system, on the other hand, is a small neighbourhood we have already begun to walk through with probes and landers. If there is a second genesis of life anywhere close to us, finding it would change everything. It would tell us that life is not unique to Earth and might pop up wherever conditions allow. So it makes sense to start the hunt right here at home, world by world, like an investigation with a list of suspects. Not every suspect is promising. Some planets almost beg us not to bother. Take Mercury. It orbits so close to the Sun that its surface bakes under intense radiation. Any atmosphere it once had has long since been blasted away, leaving only a whisper-thin exosphere that cannot hold heat or shield the ground. Temperatures swing wildly between the blistering dayside and the frozen nightside. There might be pockets of water ice hidden in permanently shadowed craters near the poles, but there is no thick air to breathe, no oceans, no stable liquid water on the surface. Mercury reminds us that not every rock near a star is a plausible home. The next world in line is Venus, which at first sounds much friendlier. It is almost the same size as Earth, so gravity is similar. It orbits in what many charts still label the habitable zone, the band around a star where liquid water could exist. For a long time, people imagined Venus as a lush twin of our planet, perhaps covered in jungles or shallow seas. Then the first spacecraft arrived, and the illusion collapsed. The atmosphere turned out to be incredibly thick, with pressures on the surface that would crush most submarines. It is made mostly of carbon dioxide, with clouds of sulfuric acid. The greenhouse effect there is so extreme that the surface temperature is hot enough to melt lead. That does not mean Venus is boring. It is a cautionary tale about what can happen when a planet runs away into a greenhouse state. It also holds a small, persistent mystery high in its clouds. At certain altitudes, temperatures and pressures are less hell-like. Some researchers have suggested that microscopic life could, in theory, float in this temperate layer, protected from the worst conditions below. A few years ago, a team reported signs of phosphine gas in the atmosphere, a molecule that on Earth is often associated with biological processes. The data were noisy and the claim remains controversial, but it was enough to remind us that even a world that looks hostile from a distance can still surprise us if we keep asking what might be hiding in its corners. We can safely skip Earth in this survey. We already know there is life here. The more urgent question is whether there was ever life on our next neighbour out, Mars, and whether any traces might still survive. Mars today is cold, dry, and wrapped in a thin atmosphere that does not protect its surface very well. Yet when you look at images from orbit, you see features that look eerily familiar. Dried river channels snake across the landscape. There are deltas that look like the mouths of ancient rivers flowing into lakes. Minerals on the surface suggest that liquid water once pooled and flowed for long periods. What changed? One big difference between Mars and Earth is the presence of a strong global magnetic field. On Earth, moving metal in the outer core generates a magnetic shield that deflects much of the solar wind. Mars appears to have lost its global magnetic field billions of years ago. Without that shield, charged particles from the Sun can strip away the upper atmosphere over time. As the air thinned, surface pressure dropped, liquid water boiled away or froze, and the planet slowly dried out and chilled. If early Mars hosted lakes or shallow seas where microbes could evolve, those habitats would have become harsher and harsher as the climate deteriorated. That is why we keep sending robots. Rovers like Spirit, Opportunity, Curiosity, and Perseverance have spent years crawling over Martian rocks, drilling samples, and looking for chemical signatures that hint at ancient life. They have found clays that form in water, sediments that could have settled in lakes, and complex organic molecules in some rocks. Orbiters have spotted plumes of methane in the atmosphere that seem to change with the seasons. On Earth, methane is often produced by living organisms, though it can also arise from non-biological processes. We have even found a Martian meteorite on Earth with tiny structures that some scientists once argued might be fossils of microorganisms, though most now agree that natural chemistry can produce similar shapes. None of these clues is conclusive. Together, though, they paint a picture of a world that might once have been habitable, and perhaps even inhabited, at least by microbes. If any Martian life still exists, the best bet is that it hides underground, protected from radiation and temperature swings. There might be briny pockets of water under polar ice caps, or deep in the crust. When you think about that, it is hard not to wonder whether a drill, someday, will bring up a sample under the ice that finally moves the debate from maybe to yes. Beyond Mars lies a very different kind of planet. Jupiter is not a rocky world with a surface in the usual sense. It is a giant ball of gas and fluid that gets denser and hotter with depth. The deeper you go, the more intense the pressure becomes, until chemistry behaves in almost alien ways. The tops of its clouds are stunning, but exposed to brutal winds and radiation. Some scientists have imagined that life could, in theory, exist as floating organisms in a narrow region of those clouds. However, the conditions would be so unstable that it seems unlikely for complex, stable ecosystems to evolve there. The real excitement around Jupiter comes from its moons. The 4 largest, called the Galilean moons, after Galileo who first saw them, are big enough to have layered interiors with cores, mantles, and crusts. Europa in particular has become a star in our search for life. Its surface is a bright shell of ice, crisscrossed with dark streaks that look like cracked glass that has been slowly pulled apart and frozen again. These patterns suggest that the ice shell is not rigid all the way through. Instead, there is strong evidence for a global ocean of liquid water beneath, kept from freezing solid by heat from tidal flexing as Jupiter's gravity kneads the moon. That hidden ocean might be tens of kilometers deep and could contain more water than all of Earth's oceans combined. We have hints of activity reaching from that ocean into space. Spacecraft have seen plumes of material shooting up from Europa's surface, and reanalysis of older data from the Galileo mission added weight to that discovery. If water from the ocean is venting into space, we might someday be able to fly through a plume and sample the spray directly, tasting the chemistry of a sea that never sees the sun. Other icy moons in the outer solar system add to the list of intriguing candidates. Ganymede, the largest moon in the solar system, seems to host multiple layers of liquid water or slushy ice stacked under its crust. Callisto may also hide an ocean beneath a battered surface. Around Saturn, the small moon Enceladus has dazzled scientists by shooting jets of water vapour and ice grains from cracks near its south pole. The Cassini spacecraft flew through these plumes and detected salts, simple organic compounds, and signs that hot water is interacting with rock on the sea floor. On Earth, similar hydrothermal vents at the bottom of our oceans host rich communities of life that do not depend on sunlight at all. If Enceladus has a rocky core, liquid water, and a source of chemical energy where warm water meets rock, it checks many of the boxes we associate with habitable environments. Titan, another moon of Saturn, takes the weirdness even further. It has a thick atmosphere rich in nitrogen, thicker than Earth's, and its surface is dotted with lakes and rivers. The twist is that these lakes are not filled with water. They contain liquid methane and ethane because the surface is so cold that these hydrocarbons behave like water does here. Titan even has a methane cycle, with evaporation, clouds, rain, and erosion. At first glance, Titan seems too cold for familiar biochemistry. Water there is locked up as rock-hard ice. Yet some scientists have proposed that life could arise in liquid methane, using different solvents and reactions. Molecules could float and react in those lakes, forming complex structures adapted to that strange environment. Supporting that idea, Titan also appears to have an internal ocean of water mixed with ammonia beneath its icy crust, offering a second, more familiar kind of potential habitat. To explore these possibilities, NASA is developing a rotorcraft mission called Dragonfly that will hop across Titan's surface, sampling dunes and possibly peering near the edges of dark lakes. Imagine seeing the first close-up images from a shoreline where the waves are made of methane. When you step back and list these sites, the solar system begins to look crowded with potential. Subsurface oceans on Europa, Ganymede, Callisto, and Enceladus. Cloud layers on Venus with moderate temperatures. Underground niches on Mars. Exotic lakes and deep interior oceans on Titan. Even some dwarf planets such as Ceres and distant objects in the Kuiper belt may have, or once have had, pockets of liquid water beneath their surfaces. Wherever liquid water can persist for long periods, wherever chemical gradients can supply energy, nature may have had the chance to run the experiment of life. There is one more class of objects worth mentioning. Comets and certain asteroids are not hospitable homes for life as we know it. They are small, lack atmospheres, and are bombarded by radiation. But they may still be important in the story. Several missions that have flown past comets or landed on them have detected complex organic molecules on their dusty surfaces. These include amino acids and other carbon-rich compounds that are important ingredients for biochemistry. This has led to the idea of panspermia, the possibility that life, or at least the building blocks of life, can be transported across space on rocks and ice, seeding young planets with useful chemistry. Right now, Most scientists think comets and asteroids are more likely to be delivery vehicles than cradles for life themselves. They can act like frozen packages, preserving interesting chemistry and dropping it onto worlds where conditions are better suited to sustained biology. That does not make them any less important. If we want to understand how life begins, it matters whether a planet has to assemble everything locally from simple ingredients, or whether it receives a boost from material formed elsewhere in the solar system. For all the excitement, we must be honest. So far, every candidate we have looked at is still just that, a candidate. We have not yet scooped up a sample from an ocean under ice and watched an alien microbe swim under the microscope. We have not drilled into Martian permafrost and found living cells. We have not hovered over a Titan lake and seen ripples that indicate something moving just below the surface. Our instruments have revealed places that might host life, but they have not yet caught it in the act. In the coming decades, missions like Europa Clipper and the European Space Agency's JUICE spacecraft will fly past icy moons again and again, mapping their surfaces and tasting their surroundings. More capable rovers will roam Mars, and sample return missions will try to bring Martian rocks back to Earth. If Dragonfly launches and reaches Titan, we will get a closer look at one of the strangest environments in our neighbourhood. Each mission is a step in a long, careful process. Together, they will tell us whether our solar system contains only one origin of life, or something more. If we eventually find a second genesis here, even a humble microbial one, the implications will be profound. It would mean that given the right conditions, life does not just emerge once, it emerges repeatedly. That would tilt the odds in favour of a universe where biology is common, even if intelligence is not. If, on the other hand, we search every promising corner of our solar system and come up empty, it will whisper a different message about how rare the spark might be. Either way, our backyard study can only take us so far. The solar system is one sample from one star, with one set of planets and moons. To understand how typical or unusual it is, we have to zoom out and look at many other star systems. How many have planets at the right distances and sizes? How many hold rocky worlds with atmospheres and maybe oceans? To answer that, we need a different kind of survey, one that counts not just local suspects, but the entire catalogue of worlds orbiting distant suns. When astronomers first tried to answer that survey question, the honest answer was almost nothing. For most of history, we did not know of a single planet beyond our solar system. We guessed they must exist. It felt strange to imagine that our sun was the only star with worlds. But we had no direct proof. The stars were just points of light. Any planets around them were drowned out, too faint and too close to see with ordinary telescopes. So instead of trying to see the planets themselves, astronomers started to look for their effects. One clever trick is called the radial velocity method. Imagine a star with a planet going around it. The planet feels the gravity of the star, but the star also feels the gravity of the planet. They both orbit around a shared centre of mass. To an observer far away, the star will wobble very slightly, moving toward and away from us over and over. Light carries that motion. When the star moves toward us, its light is shifted a tiny bit toward the blue end of the spectrum. When it moves away, the light shifts toward the red. By splitting the star's light into a rainbow and measuring these shifts very carefully, telescopes can detect that wobble. From the pattern, scientists can estimate how heavy the planet is and how long it takes to orbit. The first confirmed exoplanets around Sun-like stars were found this way in the 1990s, and they were nothing like what we expected. Instead of cousins of Earth, the early discoveries were giant planets similar to Jupiter, but orbiting much closer to their stars. Some had years that lasted only a few days. Temperatures on their day sides would be high enough to vaporize many materials. They were called hot Jupiters, and they forced astronomers to rethink their ideas about how planetary systems form. If such strange worlds exist, what else might be out there that we simply were not seeing yet? The next big leap came from a different method, one that does not look at the colour of starlight, but at its brightness. If a planet crosses in front of its star from our point of view, it will block a tiny fraction of the starlight for a short time. The star appears to dim slightly and then brighten again. This is called a transit. The amount of dimming tells you how big the planet is compared to the star, and the timing of repeated dips reveals the length of the planet's year. The Kepler Space Telescope was built to exploit this trick on an enormous scale. Instead of scanning the whole sky, Kepler stared at one patch, watching more than 100,000 stars almost continuously for years. It measured their brightness with incredible precision, hunting for the telltale pattern of small, regular dips. The raw data looked like static at first glance, full of noise and glitches. But buried in that noise were thousands of planets. Kepler's discoveries transformed our picture of the galaxy. Suddenly we knew that planets are not rare decorations, they are common outcomes of star formation. Many stars have multiple planets. Some planetary systems are compact, with several worlds packed closer to their star than Mercury is to our Sun. Others have planets in eccentric orbits, looping in and out in ways that would destabilize our own solar system. There are super-Earths, which are bigger and heavier than Earth, but smaller than Neptune, and mini-Neptunes, which sit between familiar categories. From these thousands of detections, astronomers could begin to do statistics. They could ask, for example, how often small rocky planets appear in orbits where temperatures might allow liquid water to exist on their surfaces. By correcting for the limitations of the telescope and the orientations of the orbits, they could estimate how many such worlds might exist in the galaxy as a whole. The numbers are still uncertain, but they point toward a universe where Earth-sized planets in temperate zones are not rare jewels. They might be scattered through the galaxy by the billions. A newer mission called TESS, the Transiting Exoplanet Survey Satellite, took a different approach. Instead of staring at one patch of sky, TESS scans almost the entire sky in strips, focusing on stars that are relatively close to us. That makes its discoveries especially useful for follow-up work with larger telescopes. When TESS finds a planet that passes in front of a nearby star, future observatories can study the starlight that filters through the planet's atmosphere during the transit. In that faint fingerprint, we may find hints of gases that tell us what kind of world we are dealing with. At this point, it is tempting to feel triumphant. We have gone from 0 known exoplanets to thousands. We have learned that planets are common, that small rocky planets are not unusual, and that many of them orbit in regions where they could, in principle, hold liquid water. It feels like the universe is laying out a vast menu of potential homes for life. Yet there are important caveats hiding in those numbers, and they matter a lot when we try to connect all this to the question of aliens. First, both the wobble method and the transit method have strong biases. They are best at finding large planets close to their stars, where the wobble and the dimming are largest and most frequent. Smaller planets, especially ones on wider orbits, are much harder to detect. They might be there in huge numbers, but they are quieter in the data. The same is true for planets that do not transit from our viewpoint. If the orbital plane is tilted relative to our line of sight, the planet never passes directly in front of the star, so we see no dip, even if the planet is real. That means every catalogue of exoplanets is a distorted picture. It is like trying to understand all the fish in the ocean by using a net that only catches certain sizes near the surface. You can still learn a lot, but you have to be careful about how you generalize. When scientists correct for these biases, they use models and assumptions. Those choices influence the final estimates of how common Earth-like planets really are. Change the assumptions, and the answer can shift by a factor of several. Second, even when a planet sits in what we call the habitable zone, that label can be misleading. The habitable zone is defined as the range of distances from a star where, given a suitable atmosphere, a rocky planet could maintain liquid water on its surface. The key phrase is, given a suitable atmosphere. Two planets at the same distance from similar stars could have wildly different climates depending on their initial conditions, volcanic activity, composition, and history. Venus and Earth illustrate this clearly. They are similar in size and not so different in distance from the Sun, yet one is a hot, crushing world with a suffocating atmosphere, and the other is blue and temperate. Now scale that idea up to exoplanets. A world in the habitable zone could be a frozen snowball if it lacks greenhouse gases, or a steam-wrapped hothouse if it has too many. It could have a thin atmosphere stripped by stellar flares, or a thick blanket of clouds that bounces light back into space. The simple label habitable zone does not guarantee actual habitability. Third, for most exoplanets we have detected so far, we know only a few basic properties. We might know their size and orbital period from transits. We might know a minimum mass from the wobble. From those, we can estimate a density and guess whether a planet is rocky, watery, or gas-dominated. In a few cases, we have begun to detect molecules in the atmospheres of large planets, such as water vapor, carbon monoxide, or sodium. But these early measurements mostly tell us about hot giants, not small Earth-like worlds. We are just at the beginning of atmospheric science for exoplanets. To really answer the question that keeps pulling at us, we need more than sizes and orbits. We need signs of chemistry that is hard to explain without life. On Earth, one of the most obvious markers is the combination of oxygen and methane in the atmosphere. Oxygen is highly reactive. If nothing constantly replenished it, it would gradually bind with rocks and other materials, and the concentration in the air would drop. Life keeps it high. Methane, too, is short-lived in air, and significant amounts here are produced by living organisms. Seeing both gases together in a distant planet's atmosphere would be a strong hint that something interesting is happening there. This is where the next generation of telescopes comes in. Instruments like the James Webb Space Telescope and future space observatories are designed to study exoplanet atmospheres more precisely. By watching a star and planet system in different colours of light during a transit, they can tease out faint spectral fingerprints. For planets that do not transit, advanced techniques such as direct imaging can sometimes separate the planet's light from the star's glare, especially for young, hot planets far from their stars. Even so, detecting reliable biosignatures is going to be hard. Many chemical combinations have both biological and non-biological explanations. For example, you can produce oxygen through the breakdown of water by ultraviolet light without any help from life. You can produce methane through certain geological processes. We will need to consider the full context of a planet, its star, its temperature, and its history before we can argue that a particular atmospheric mix is best explained by living processes. There is another wrinkle. Our current search strategies are based heavily on Earth as the model. We look for liquid water because all known life here needs it. We look for carbon chemistry because that is what our biochemistry uses. We look for gases like oxygen and methane because here those are tied closely to biology. That is reasonable because it grounds our search in tested science rather than pure imagination. But it also carries the risk of overlooking life that uses different strategies and solvents, like hypothetical methane-based organisms on a Titan-like exoplanet. Still, even with those limitations, the exoplanet revolution has changed the emotional landscape of the alien question. When you look up at the stars now, you are not just seeing points of light, you are seeing systems. You can imagine that around many of those dots are families of worlds. Some are giant and stormy, some are scorched, some may be covered in ice. Some perhaps have continents and seas. A few may have skies under which something looks back at the stars with wondering eyes. To bring that picture closer, it helps to imagine yourself standing on one of these worlds. Picture a planet a little larger than Earth, orbiting a red dwarf star so close that its year is only a few weeks long. Because it is so close, gravity has locked one side always facing the star, the way our moon always shows one face to Earth. One hemisphere is in permanent day, the other in eternal night. In between, along a ring of twilight, temperatures might be just right for liquid water. Life there would evolve under a fixed sun that hangs low over the horizon, never rising or setting. Or imagine a water world with no continents at all, just a global ocean. The waves might roll endlessly around the planet, storms building without land to break them. Life there, if it exists, could spend its entire history in the sea. Intelligence might arise in creatures that move through water as easily as we walk on land, developing tools and technology shaped by currents and pressure instead of forests and deserts. Such stories are not proof, of course, but they help us feel the range of what might be possible. As the catalogues of known exoplanets grow, certain questions become more pressing. How many planets land in the right size and temperature range? How often do they keep their atmospheres? How many orbit stars that are stable enough for long periods without constant flares that strip away air or sterilize surfaces? These are the ingredients for what researchers sometimes call habitability on a galactic scale. Each new observation gives us one more puzzle piece, but we are still far from seeing the full picture. It is easy to be swept up in the excitement and assume that habitable means inhabited. Yet so far, every exoplanet we have ever detected has been seen only as a faint dip in brightness or a tiny smudge of light. We have no confirmed alien forests, no visible city lights, no radio transmissions traced back to a specific star. All our conclusions about the frequency of life are, at this stage, extrapolations resting on a single example, Earth, plus some basic physics and chemistry. This is where the search for aliens crosses into a deeper problem. When you have limited data and a vast unknown, how do you turn those pieces into a meaningful estimate? What is the right way to go from counts of stars, planets, and possible habitable worlds to a guess about how many civilizations might exist right now? And once you have that guess, how do you relate it to the stubborn silence we actually observe? To make progress, astronomers and thinkers did something bold. They took the entire journey from stars to minds and broke it into steps, each with its own unknown probability. Then they wrote those steps into a simple equation, not as a magic formula, but as a way to organize ignorance. By changing the values at each step, you can explore optimistic and pessimistic universes on paper and see how they collide with the fact that no one has said hello yet. This equation has a simple name that sounds almost friendly. It is called the Drake equation, after the astronomer who wrote it down in the early 1960s. At first glance, it looks like someone took the whole story of life in the galaxy and broke it into a neat shopping list. You start with how many stars form, then ask how many of those stars have planets, how many of those planets are habitable, and so on, all the way down to how many civilizations are broadcasting right now. The charm of the equation is that each step feels reasonable. We know stars are born in great clouds of gas and dust. We know many of them have planets. We know that on at least one planet, chemistry gave rise to life, and that life eventually produced beings who can point radio telescopes at the sky and wonder who else is out there. To use the equation, you write the galaxy-wide number of communicating civilizations as a product of several factors. One is the rate at which suitable stars are born. Another is the fraction of those stars that have planets. Then comes the average number of potentially habitable planets per planetary system. After that, the terms become more uncertain. You have the fraction of habitable planets where life actually appears, the fraction of those where intelligence evolves, the fraction of intelligent species that build technology and send detectable signals, and finally, the average lifetime of such a communicating civilization. It is important to notice what the equation does and what it does not do. It does not reveal the correct values for these terms. It simply says that if you want to estimate how many cosmic neighbours might exist now, these are the questions you must answer. In that sense, it is less a solution and more a map of our ignorance. Some of the early terms are now much better constrained than when the equation was first written. In the 1960s, astronomers were still arguing about how common planets were. Today, thanks to exoplanet surveys, we know that planets are widespread. For many types of stars, it seems likely that the majority have at least one planet, and often several. So the fraction of stars with planets is probably closer to 1 than to 0. We can also make educated guesses about the number of potentially habitable planets per planetary system. This does not mean we know which planets are actually comfortable for life. It means we can estimate how many fall into the right ranges of size and distance from their stars. Depending on how generous you are with your definition of habitable, you might end up with something like one such planet for every few stars, or perhaps one per star in some regions of the galaxy. If you multiply those relatively optimistic early factors together, you quickly get a large number of potentially habitable worlds. With hundreds of billions of stars in the galaxy and a decent fraction hosting planets, you can easily arrive at tens of billions of planets that might, in principle, support liquid water and complex chemistry on or near their surfaces. On that foundation, the universe looks fertile. The real uncertainty waits in the later terms. How often does life actually start on a habitable planet? Here we have only one example, Earth, and it does not tell us the full story. We know that life appeared here relatively early in the planet's history, perhaps within a few 100 million years after conditions calmed down enough for oceans to form. That suggests that, under the right conditions, simple life might arise fairly quickly. But we do not know whether that was inevitable or a rare stroke of luck. People who are optimistic sometimes assume that if a planet is roughly Earth-like and stays stable for a long time, life will appear on most of them. In that case, the fraction of habitable planets where life arises might be something like 1/2 or 1/10. Pessimists can go the other way. They imagine that the jump from non-living chemistry to self-replicating, evolving organisms is incredibly unlikely. In that view, life might appear on only 1 in a million habitable worlds, or even fewer. The same tension appears when we ask how often simple life leads to intelligence. On Earth, life remained microscopic for billions of years. Multicellular organisms are a relatively recent development in the history of the planet. Large brains and complex societies are even newer, a thin layer on top of deep time. It is possible that once life becomes complex, intelligence is a common outcome, because being able to solve problems and cooperate is useful in many environments. It is also possible that intelligence at our level is a rare side effect of many accidents, contingent on a long list of events that almost never align. Then there is the question of technology. Not every intelligent species will build radio transmitters or laser beacons. Some might stay at a level of development that never produces powerful electromagnetic signatures. Others might explore different channels entirely, using modes of communication that are hard for us to detect. The fraction that ends up shouting into the void with detectable signals could be large, or it could be tiny. The final term in the Drake equation may be the most emotionally charged. It is the average lifetime of a communicating civilization. Imagine that a technological society arises on a planet and begins broadcasting or otherwise leaving clear signatures of its presence. How long does that window stay open? Does it last for many millions of years as the civilization stabilizes and spreads? Or does it close quickly as the species destroys itself, falls back into silence, or transitions to forms of existence that no longer produce obvious traces? This term is where human fears and hopes intrude most strongly. If you set the average lifetime to a very long value, maybe millions of years, then even a low rate of appearance can still lead to many civilizations being present in the galaxy at once. If life and intelligence arise only rarely, but those who reach the communicating stage tend to endure, the product can still be large. On the other hand, if most civilizations burn out quickly, even generous assumptions earlier in the equation can still lead to only a handful of neighbours, or none at all. To see how sensitive the equation is, it helps to play with some numbers in your head. Suppose you imagine a galaxy where stars form at a rate of a few suitable stars per year. Most of those stars have planets, and about 1 in 10 of those planets hosts a world in the habitable zone. If life appears on half of those habitable worlds, intelligence evolves on 1 in 10 of them, and technology on 1 in 10 of those. You end up with, perhaps, a few technological civilizations forming every million years or so. If each of those lasts for 1 million years, there could be thousands of them sharing the galaxy with us right now. Change one assumption and the picture shifts dramatically. Keep everything else the same, but say that life arises on only 1 in a million habitable worlds instead of half. Suddenly, technological civilizations become incredibly rare. You might have 1 in the entire galaxy at any given moment, or none. In that scenario, the fact that we have not heard from anyone yet is not surprising at all. We might simply be alone, not because the universe is empty, but because the odds are stacked against life at the very first step. You can also flip the sensitivity onto the lifetime term. Imagine a universe where life appears fairly easily on habitable worlds, and intelligence and technology are not too rare, but where technological societies tend to self-destruct or lose interest in broadcasting after only a few thousand years. In a galaxy that has been around for more than 10 billion years, those short windows are like brief flashes. The chance that 2 or more of them overlap at the same time and within communication range becomes much smaller than you might expect. This is where the equation reveals its deeper message. It shows us that almost any story we want to tell about the galaxy can be made to fit by choosing suitable values for the unknowns. If you want a crowded universe full of old, wise civilizations, you pick high probabilities for life and intelligence and long lifetimes. If you want a lonely universe where we are a statistical fluke, you pick tiny probabilities or very short lifetimes. The equation itself does not stop you. It simply holds up a mirror to your assumptions. That is not a failure. It is a warning and an invitation. It reminds us which questions matter most. Rather than arguing endlessly about whether the galaxy feels crowded or empty, we can ask which parts of the equation we can actually measure or constrain with observations. We can also ask what our own future choices might do to the lifetime term, the one factor in the equation where we are not just guessing, but actively writing the value with our behavior. There is another twist that often goes unstated. The Drake equation was framed around civilizations that are actively broadcasting or otherwise detectable by technologies similar to ours. It assumes that being able to tune a radio or point a dish is the relevant threshold. But that may be a very narrow view. A civilization could be wildly advanced and still effectively invisible to us if it chooses not to beam powerful signals into space, or if its preferred communication channels are not ones we recognize. In that case, the fraction of technological species that we can detect might be much lower than the fraction that actually exist. Some thinkers have tried to modify or supplement the Drake equation to include such possibilities. They add terms for the fraction of civilizations that build megastructures that might be seen as engineering signatures, or that leak enough waste heat to stand out against the background. Others ponder whether self-replicating probes could spread through the galaxy far faster than organic beings, leaving a different kind of presence. Every time a new idea arises, it tends to manifest as another factor in a Drake-like expression, another knob you can turn. For a moment, try an exercise. Imagine that the fraction of habitable planets where life arises is very small, say 1 in a million, and the fraction where intelligence evolves is also 1 in a million. That sounds crippling. Yet in a galaxy with tens of billions of habitable planets, even those harsh odds can still produce several technological civilizations over the entire history of the galaxy. On the other hand, those civilizations might be so widely separated in space and time that they never become aware of one another. Each might live and die under a quiet sky, believing it is alone. Now flip the numbers. Picture a universe where life arises on most habitable worlds, intelligence on a significant fraction of those, and technology on many of the intelligent ones. In that case, without some further filter, the galaxy ought to be buzzing with activity. Signals, beacons, probes, or visible engineering should be sprinkled across the sky. Yet when we actually look and listen with our current tools, we do not see or hear anything that everyone agrees is a clear sign of extraterrestrial technology. This clash between optimistic estimates and observed silence is often called the Great Filter Problem. Somewhere between stars forming and civilizations talking across the galaxy, there must be bottlenecks that are harder to pass than they appear in our hopeful stories. The filter might sit early, at the origin of life. It might sit later, at the emergence of intelligence, or at the transition to stable, long-lived technological societies. It might not be a single step at all, but a gauntlet of pressures that slowly winnow most species away. We cannot yet say where that filter lies. We can, however, see how much hangs on the answer. If the filter is mostly behind us, if the hardest steps were the ones Earth already passed long ago, then we might indeed be one of the very few technological species in the galaxy. That would make us precious and fragile, but it would also mean the path ahead could, in principle, stretch on for a very long time if we avoid destroying ourselves. If the filter sits mainly ahead, in the era we are just entering, then our current technological adolescence might be a dangerous, narrow bridge that most do not survive. All of these musings hang, once again, on very sparse data. Right now we have one confirmed planet with life, one intelligent species that builds radio telescopes, and a sky that returns only natural signals when we listen. The Drake equation lets us explore many possible universes in our minds, but it does not tell us which universe we live in. To find out, we need more than clever algebra. We need observations that can start to push some of those uncertain terms away from wild guess and toward measured fact. That is one reason why the search for biosignatures on exoplanets matters so much. If we detect clear signs of life on even one other world, that instantly changes our estimate of how often life arises. If we find multiple independent origins of life within our own solar system, perhaps on Mars and an icy moon, that would shift the numbers even more dramatically. If, in contrast, we keep finding habitable environments without any trace of biology, decade after decade, then the idea of a strong early filter will gain weight. The same logic applies to the search for technosignatures, the telltale signs of technology rather than simple biology. A single confirmed detection of an artificial radio signal, a clearly engineered structure, or some other unmistakable footprint of alien industry would tell us that at least one other technological civilization exists or once existed. That would force us to revisit every cautious term in the equation. It would also invite new questions about how far such civilizations can spread and how loudly they speak. Until that happens, the Drake equation sits in an odd place in our thinking. It is both a symbol of scientific seriousness in the face of the alien question and a reminder of how much we still do not know. It shows that the mystery is not just emotional, it is quantitative. There are numbers we could, in principle, measure. There are probabilities we could constrain. Each new mission, each new observation, is a small push against those unknowns. At the same time, the equation has another, quieter effect. It invites us to think about ourselves as one term among many in a larger cosmic story. Our choices about how long our civilization lasts and how we present ourselves to the galaxy are not just personal or national decisions. They are inputs into a simple line of reasoning about whether others are likely to ever hear from us at all. Standing under the night sky, you can feel both sides of this. On one hand, there is the dizzying arithmetic of stars, planets, and probabilities, pointing toward a galaxy that could be filled with minds. On the other, there is the stubborn fact that when we turn our detectors outward, we see only the quiet of natural processes, the hiss of cosmic background noise, and the steady shining of distant suns. Between those two lies a gap that numbers alone cannot bridge. To understand why that gap might be wider than it first appears, we have to go beyond counting civilizations and think about the practical realities of contact. Even if the galaxy holds many technological species, the distances between stars, the speed of light, and the limits of real spacecraft change the story in ways the Drake equation does not capture. To see what that really means, we need to leave the comfort of equations and face the hard limits that physics puts on any attempt to reach across the stars. If we imagine that other civilizations exist somewhere in the galaxy, the next blunt question is how anyone could ever reach anyone else. On paper, the Drake equation can fill the Milky Way with minds. In practice, those minds are stranded on islands of rock and gas, separated by oceans of empty space. The numbers that describe those oceans matter because they are the rules of the game that no one can break. Start close to home. The distance from Earth to the Moon is about 1 light second. Light leaving our planet takes about 1 second to reach the lunar surface. That already feels large when you consider how long the Apollo missions took with chemical rockets. Yet in cosmic terms, the Earth-Moon gap is essentially zero. The Sun is about 8 light minutes away. Radio signals from Earth reach it in a time it takes you to boil water for tea. Already that feels more spacious. Then you step up to the next rung. The nearest star beyond the Sun, Proxima Centauri, is roughly 4 light-years away. A light-year is the distance light travels in 1 year. Radio waves are light, just at different frequencies, so they move at exactly that speed. A message sent today, travelling at the speed of light, would take about 4 years to get there, and another 4 years for any reply to come back. That is an 8-year round trip for a single exchange with our closest stellar neighbour. Humans are not even close to building ships that can travel at light speed. The fastest spacecraft we have ever launched, such as the Parker Solar Probe, move at a few 100,000 kilometers per hour at their peaks. That is impressive by human standards, but compared to light, it is slow. If you take that best speed and point it at Proxima Centauri, the travel time stretches into tens of thousands of years. Any crew you send on such a journey would be long gone before arrival, unless you imagine multi-generational ships or suspended animation. When you scale up again to typical distances between stars in the galaxy, the problem deepens. The Milky Way is about 100,000 light-years across. Even if technological civilizations emerge relatively close to each other in space, they may still be separated by dozens or hundreds of light-years. At light speed, a message would take centuries to cross that gap. A physical ship, traveling far slower, would take so long that calling it a mission starts to feel like calling a glacier a delivery truck. Physics, as far as we know, is not interested in our frustration. The speed of light in a vacuum appears to be an absolute speed limit for moving information and matter. Many people have wondered whether some clever trick might exist to duck around this limit. Ideas like wormholes, warp drives, and shortcuts through higher dimensions have appeared in both science fiction and serious theoretical papers. So far, every attempt to turn them into a realistic engineering plan has run into huge obstacles. They demand exotic forms of matter or energy that may not exist, or they risk creating paradoxes and instabilities that break the very theories they are built on. You can think of these conclusions in two ways. One view is pessimistic. The universe looks like a series of deeply separated bubbles. Civilizations may light up, burn bright for a while, and fade again, all without ever touching. The other view is more subtle. It says that the universe is not forbidding contact. It is simply telling us that contact will not look like the easy, back and forth conversations we have on a phone or a video call. It will be slow, one way, and demanding. That changes how we should picture any future meeting with aliens. If we accept that travelling to other stars with biological bodies is extremely hard, we naturally turn our attention to messages. Messages are cheaper, they require less energy than giant ships, and they can wait. A beam of radio waves does not care whether it takes decades or centuries to arrive. It does not get bored or hungry. It just moves outward, expanding into space, weakening as it goes. That is why many early efforts in the search for extraterrestrial intelligence focused on radio astronomy. Radio waves have several advantages. They can pass through dust and gas that block visible light. They can be generated with relatively simple equipment and detected with large antennas on the ground. Certain frequencies are naturally quiet, with low background noise, which makes it easier to pick out artificial signals. There is even a narrow region of the spectrum near the emission line of hydrogen, the most common element in the universe, that some have called the water hole. The idea is that any technical civilization familiar with basic physics would notice that quiet patch and might choose to use it as a calling channel. So far, humans have sent only a few deliberate messages into the cosmos. One famous example is the Arecibo message, a brief broadcast beamed at a star cluster in the 1970s. It was more of a symbolic gesture than a serious attempt at conversation, a way of saying that we had reached a level of technology where such things were possible. In addition to these intentional broadcasts, Earth has been leaking radio and television signals into space for roughly a century. These signals fade with distance and are often weak compared to cosmic noise, but in principle, a very advanced civilization with large, sensitive instruments might detect them from several light-years away. Imagine those signals as a growing bubble. Right now, the furthest shows and news bulletins have travelled about 100 light-years in every direction. That volume contains a few tens of thousands of stars, which sounds like a lot until you place it inside the galaxy as a whole. The Milky Way holds hundreds of billions of stars spread across a disk more than 100,000 light-years across. Our radio bubble is a small, faint patch in one spiral arm, easily missed if no one is looking straight at it with enough patience and technology. The same logic applies in reverse. If other civilizations are broadcasting, their signals will also form expanding bubbles. For us to detect them, several things must line up. First, the civilization has to exist in a period that overlaps with ours. Second, it has to be close enough that the signal is still strong when it reaches us. Third, we have to be listening in the right direction and at the right frequencies, with instruments sensitive enough to see the signal above the noise. If any of those conditions fails, the sky stays quiet. For a moment, picture a map of the galaxy. where every technological civilization lights up as a tiny dot during its broadcasting phase. Each dot brightens, then fades, sometimes overlapping, sometimes isolated. If the average lifetime of that phase is short compared to the age of the galaxy, most dots will not overlap in time. Even if there are many dots scattered across billions of years, the chances of one dot seeing another in its brief active window can be low. From the point of view of any one civilization, the universe might look empty, even if it is not. Travel adds another layer. Suppose a civilization, much older and more capable than ours, has solved the engineering challenges of sending robotic probes between stars at a fraction of light speed. It could, in principle, send self-replicating machines that hop from system to system, building copies of themselves from local materials and spreading through the galaxy. Even at a slow fraction of light speed, such probes could cross the Milky Way in a few tens of millions of years, a blink compared to the age of the galaxy. If that kind of wave had ever swept through, some thinkers argue that we should see evidence. Probes in our own solar system, artifacts in asteroid belts, strange structures on distant worlds. The fact that we do not see such things has been used as an argument that either such probes are much harder to make than they appear in thought experiments, or that civilizations capable of building them rarely choose to do so. Perhaps they are constrained by resources or ethics. Perhaps most technological species are destroyed or transformed by their own inventions before they get that far. Even if we pull back from self-replicating machines and stick to more modest starships, the problem remains. The energy required to accelerate a massive ship carrying living beings to even a small fraction of light speed is enormous. You have to accelerate all that mass and then slow it down again at the other end. The ship must endure collisions with interstellar dust grains at high speeds, each one a tiny bullet. Life support systems must function for decades or centuries without failure. The crew must remain mentally stable and culturally coherent across generations, or you must freeze them or replace them with something that can wait in silence. One way around some of these problems is to skip biological cargo entirely. You can send information instead of flesh and blood. If you can encode minds as digital patterns and run them on machines, then a relatively small craft could carry many minds in the form of data. Once it arrives, it can build bodies or virtual worlds as needed. That picture moves the problem into the realm of computing and nanotechnology. It also raises its own questions about identity and survival, but from the point of view of physics, it is more plausible than launching cities. However we slice it, the big picture remains. Space is huge. Light speed is fast but finite. Everything made of ordinary matter must respect that speed limit. Those simple facts do not make contact impossible, but they shape what contact can reasonably look like. They push us away from images of effortless star empires and towards something more patient and strange. Long-term messages drifting between rare points. Ancient probes waiting silently in the dark. Civilizations that plan not on human timescales, but on spans of thousands or millions of years. For our own species, this raises a more intimate question. What kind of commitment would it take to launch a serious interstellar project? It would require a society that can focus resources over generations, invest in outcomes that no living decision-maker will personally see, and maintain curiosity over deep time. It would also demand a level of global cooperation, or at least stability, that we have not yet mastered. When you frame it that way, you begin to see why some writers talk about contact as a test not just of engineering, but of maturity. This is one reason why many scientists argue that listening may be more realistic than travelling, at least for now. Building and operating radio telescopes, optical observatories, and data analysis pipelines is hard but manageable. It fits within the budgets and attention spans of current governments and institutions. If we are patient and systematic, we can search large swathes of the sky for artificial signals in many frequency bands, looking for patterns that natural processes do not easily produce. Of course, that search has to contend with another hurdle. The universe is noisy. Stars flare, pulsars beam regular radio pulses as they spin. Gas clouds emit at certain characteristic frequencies. Our own technology adds interference, from satellites to mobile phones. Any attempt to sift through this ocean of signals for something engineered has to be extremely careful. It must distinguish genuine anomalies from instrumental glitches, terrestrial reflections, and known astrophysical sources. You might picture this as standing on a beach, listening to waves, wind, and distant thunder, and trying to catch the faint pattern of a drumbeat hidden inside. It is possible in principle, especially if the drum is very loud and very regular. But if the drummer is quiet, intermittent, or playing a rhythm you do not expect, you might miss it entirely. This is the reality that modern searches for technosignatures face. The speed of light and the vastness of space do not give us a reason to stop listening. They give us a reason to be realistic about what success would look like. We are unlikely to have a real-time back-and-forth conversation with aliens in the way we chat online. If we do ever catch a signal, it may be a one-way message from the deep past, sent by a civilization that no longer exists, or by one that has changed beyond recognition. Answering it may mean writing a letter to beings who will not receive it for centuries. You might find that idea sad, or you might find it strangely beautiful. Even a one-way message would mean that we are not the only spark of curiosity in the galaxy. It would link our short human histories to stories that stretch across light years and ages. It would also confront us with the fact that, for all our clever rockets and probes, we are still very young players in a cosmic game whose board we have only begun to map. So far, the board has given us no clear moves from others. Our detectors record pulsars, quasars, flares, and the gentle hiss of cosmic background radiation, but no repeatable structured signal that everyone can agree is a deliberate hello. Yet a few times in the last decades, radio telescopes have picked up strange, one-off bursts, signals that look almost artificial at first glance, yet appear once and never repeat in the same way. They sit in the records like penciled question marks. To understand what those puzzling blips might mean, and why most scientists still lean toward natural explanations, we have to look more closely at the signals themselves and at the tools we use to find them. When you do that, you discover a story full of human hope, careful skepticism, and a handful of radio events that still have not been fully explained. When you zoom in on those penciled question marks in the data, one of the first stories you meet begins in a quiet field in Ohio in the 1970s. There, a large, stationary radio telescope called Big Ear was listening to the sky near the frequency of neutral hydrogen. Hydrogen is the most common element in the universe. Its characteristic radio emission sits at a frequency that physics students learn early. That makes it a natural meeting place on the radio dial, a spot where many scientists suspected any deliberate beacon might choose to shout. Big Ear was not watching a single star. It was scanning strips of sky as Earth rotated, letting sources drift through its fixed gaze. On one August night, the telescope recorded a strong, narrow-band signal that rose and fell over about 70 seconds, exactly the way a point source would appear as it crossed the beam. It was far stronger than the background noise and tightly concentrated in frequency. When an astronomer later examined the printed records, he circled the numbers and wrote a short exclamation in the margin. That scribble became the name by which the event is still known today. The WOW signal, as it came to be called, has haunted discussions of aliens ever since. It seemed to check many boxes. It was in the right frequency range, near the hydrogen line. It was narrow band, unlike most natural radio sources, which tend to spread their power over wider ranges. It appeared and disappeared, just as you would expect from a source fixed relative to the stars. It did not match any known human transmission. Those features together make it one of the most intriguing candidates for an artificial signal we have ever seen. And yet, the story does not end with a triumphant announcement. The telescope never saw the signal again, despite repeated attempts to re-observe the same patch of sky. Other observatories also pointed their dishes at that area and heard only silence. There was no second burst, no pattern to decode, no sequence to analyse. We have only that one brief event recorded on an old sheet of paper and preserved in archives. Without repetition, there is no way to test whether it was truly something extraordinary or an unknown but natural fluctuation. That lack of repeatability is a recurring theme in this field. A single spike in the data is exciting, but it is also fragile. Without a way to go back and gather more information, you cannot rule out obscure instrumental effects, rare forms of interference, or unusual natural sources that you simply have not catalogued yet. It is like seeing a strange flash on the horizon once. You can speculate endlessly, but you cannot be sure whether it was a firework, a meteor, or a trick of the eye, unless it happens again with better instruments pointed in the right place. The choice of the hydrogen line as a search frequency is itself a small window into how we think about alien intentions. It is a frequency that any civilization with radio astronomy would likely discover early. It sits in a relatively quiet region of the spectrum, where the background noise from the galaxy and from their own star might be manageable. It is simple, elegant, and universal. So many listening programs have focused there, scanning that band patiently, hoping that someone else had the same idea and decided to beam a narrow tone our way. Over the years, a few other mysterious candidates have emerged in surveys near this and other frequencies. In the early 2000s, for instance, an analysis of data from a large survey found an odd signal near the hydrogen line that appeared several times but seemed to move in frequency in a way that did not match simple expectations. It was catalogued with a long string of letters and numbers and discussed as a possible sign of something unusual. Follow-up work, however, struggled to reproduce it with modern equipment, and problems with the original instrumentation and data processing were hard to rule out. That pattern can be frustrating if you are hoping for a clean, cinematic discovery. Yet it is exactly how careful science has to operate. You cannot simply elevate every odd blip to the status of alien contact. You have to ask hard questions about your tools. Was the receiver behaving as expected? Were there any local transmitters, satellites, aircraft, or reflections that might have contaminated the data? Are you seeing the same thing in multiple independent channels? If you change the pointing of the telescope slightly, does the signal follow the sky or stay fixed relative to the ground? In many famous cases, dogged checking has unmasked exciting signals as very human in origin. One observatory spent years chasing a puzzling radio source that appeared only at certain times and frequencies. It had a distinctive shape and seemed to come and go in a way that did not line up with known satellites or astronomical sources. Eventually, investigators discovered that the signal coincided with the use of a microwave oven in a nearby building. When someone impatiently opened the door before the heating cycle finished, the oven leaked a burst of radio noise that the telescope picked up. Stories like that are humbling, but they are also healthy. They remind us that our instruments are embedded in a world full of technology. Phones, radar, satellites, aircraft, and ground-based transmitters create a constant fog of artificial radioactivity. To find a faint, distant beacon in that fog, we need not just sensitive receivers, but also iron discipline about ruling out local sources. That discipline can feel like pessimism because it often ends with downgrading flashy candidates to the status of mundane interference. Yet without it, any claim would be impossible to trust. While narrowband searches continue, another class of phenomena has burst into view over the last 2 decades and captured intense interest. These are fast radio bursts, intense flashes of radio waves that last for only a few thousandths of a second. The first example was found in archival data from a telescope in Australia. It appeared as a bright pulse that cut across a range of frequencies with a slight delay pattern that suggested it had travelled through a large volume of ionised gas. At first, no one quite knew what to make of it. The dispersion pattern, that subtle stretching of the pulse across frequencies, hinted at an origin far outside our galaxy. If that was true, then the source must have been incredibly powerful to be visible across such a distance, even for a brief moment. Exotic ideas sprang up. Some people speculated about neutron stars colliding or collapsing. Others, more playfully, wondered whether these flashes might be alien beacons. As more fast radio bursts were discovered, some of the wildest ideas fell away. Many of the events looked similar to each other. Their properties lined up with what you might expect from compact, highly magnetized objects releasing sudden bursts of energy. Some bursts repeated, coming from the same region of sky again and again, which ruled out cataclysmic events that destroy their source in a single act. Observations across different wavelengths gradually linked at least some fast radio bursts to magnetars, a type of neutron star with an extremely strong magnetic field. The fact that magnetars can produce fast radio bursts does not necessarily mean that every such event has the same cause. There may be multiple mechanisms that create similar signals. However, the growing set of natural explanations has made the alien hypothesis look less necessary. When a phenomenon has plausible astrophysical causes that can account for its statistics and behavior, the burden of proof for a technological explanation becomes even heavier. That does not stop people from asking the question. You might find yourself wondering whether some tiny fraction of these bursts could still be artificial, perhaps piggybacking on natural events or using them as camouflage.
That is not impossible in a logical sense, but it is hard to test. It also shares a problem with many imaginative scenarios. It assumes that aliens are deliberately doing something that just happens to produce a pattern similar to a known natural process, yet with no clear signature that would distinguish it. This is where another key idea in this field comes in. Any serious search for technosignatures must balance two demands. It must be open-minded enough to consider unusual possibilities, but it must also be grounded enough to favour explanations that do not multiply unseen agents without necessity. The principle is simple. If a natural explanation fits the data well and requires no special pleading, you should prefer it over an artificial one, unless the artificial one makes a testable prediction that the natural one does not. Many candidates fail that test. They are intriguing partly because we do not have enough information to classify them cleanly. A one-off signal with no follow-up can rarely be pinned down. That does not make it a secret message. It makes it an unsolved instrumental or astrophysical puzzle. As instruments improve and surveys broaden, some of these puzzles quietly disappear when similar events are found in larger numbers and explained by new models of stars, gas, or plasma. At the same time, the tools we use to sift through the data are growing more sophisticated. Early searches for signals often involved humans scanning printouts by eye, looking for patterns. Now computers trawl through vast streams of data in real time, flagging anything that deviates from expected behavior. Machine learning algorithms can be trained to recognize known types of interference and natural sources, then set aside anything that does not fit. That raises both opportunities and risks. On one hand, automation allows us to search much larger volumes of sky and frequency space than any human team could handle alone. We can monitor many stars simultaneously, cover wide bands of the spectrum, and keep watch continuously for months or years. On the other hand, the algorithms carry the biases of the people who design them. If we train them only on known sources and types of interference, they may be very good at finding more of what we expect, and very bad at noticing truly novel patterns. You can picture this as a kind of cosmic hide and seek, where both players are limited. We, as the seekers, are constrained by our instruments, our models, and our attention. Any aliens, if they exist, are constrained by their own physics and history. They may not be trying to hide, but they may not be trying to be found by beings exactly like us either. The result is a search in which near misses and ambiguous hints are almost guaranteed. Look back over the list of cases that have stirred debate. The wow signal, early oddities near the hydrogen line, puzzling short bursts that turned out to be kitchen appliances or local electronics, fast radio bursts that first looked like bizarre anomalies and now increasingly resemble a new class of astrophysical flare. Each of these has walked a similar path: discovery, excitement, speculation, careful follow-up, either a natural explanation or a slow fading into an unanswered file. From a distance, that pattern might feel discouraging, as if the universe is taunting us with a series of almosts. Yet, there is another way to read it. Each time we chase down a mystery and find a natural cause, we learn more about the cosmos. We map more of the radio sky. We refine our instruments and methods. We get better at telling earthly noise from celestial signals. We build a foundation of understanding that will be crucial if something truly unnatural ever does appear. There is also a quiet comfort in knowing that the scientific community is hard to convince. If you ever hear a serious announcement that a signal has passed all tests and appears to be artificial, you will know that it has survived a gauntlet of skepticism sharpened by decades of false alarms. Until that day, the archive of strange signals remains a gallery of our own curiosity and fallibility, as well as a logbook of how patient and demanding we have learned to be. Meanwhile, a different kind of evidence has crept into public conversation, one that does not come from deep space at all. It comes from inside Earth's own atmosphere, in the form of unexplained objects seen by pilots and recorded on military sensors.
These sightings have led to hearings, new acronyms, and heated arguments about what exactly we should make of them. To separate the real unknowns from misperceptions and human-made craft, we have to apply the same mix of curiosity and caution that we bring to radio signals from the stars. For most of this story, we have been looking outward, to stars and radio waves. Yet many people who think about aliens start much closer to home. They look up, not at the Milky Way as a whole, but at strange lights and objects in our own sky. These reports feel more immediate. They involve pilots, radar operators, even military videos. If radio signals are the distant whispers of a possible other, unidentified objects in the atmosphere feel like something right over our heads. The modern wave of such stories began in the middle of the 20th century. In the early Cold War years, radar was still young, jet aircraft were pushing new speeds, and governments were deeply nervous. When a pilot reported a strange craft, or a radar operator saw an odd blip, the stakes felt high. Was this a foreign weapon? Was it some new kind of spy plane? Or was it something else entirely? Newspapers and magazines quickly discovered that readers were hungry for tales of flying discs and mysterious visitors. One of the most famous early episodes involved a reported crash in the American desert. Initial military statements mentioned a recovered disc. These were quickly revised into a more mundane story involving a weather balloon. That awkward reversal, combined with secrecy around classified projects, helped fuel a long-lasting legend about hidden wreckage and recovered bodies. For many, it became the prototype of a cover-up, even though no public physical evidence has ever confirmed the more dramatic claims. Governments could not ignore the flood of sightings. In the United States, the Air Force launched a series of study programs to catalogue and assess reports. The most famous of these efforts gathered thousands of cases over about 2 decades. Investigators interviewed witnesses, cross-checked radar records, and compared observations with known aircraft, astronomical events, and weather. At the end, they concluded that the vast majority of sightings could be explained by ordinary things seen under unusual conditions. Those explanations were often mundane but instructive. Bright planets low on the horizon can look like hovering lights, especially when air currents make them shimmer. High-altitude aircraft or weather balloons catching sunlight can appear as glowing objects to observers below. Atmospheric phenomena like temperature inversions can bend radar beams and create false targets. When people are already primed to expect something extraordinary, these misperceptions can feel far more dramatic than they are. Still, a small fraction of cases in those files were listed as unexplained. They were not proven alien craft. They were simply events where the available data were too sparse or contradictory to reach a firm conclusion. Maybe multiple witnesses disagreed about key details. Maybe records were incomplete or lost. The file closed with a shrug rather than an answer. Over time, those residual unknowns took on a life of their own in popular imagination, even though investigators never endorsed an extraterrestrial interpretation. As official studies wound down, the topic did not disappear. It migrated into popular culture. Films and television shows embraced the idea of visitors arriving in glowing ships. Books and talk shows featured stories of abductions and secret bases. These narratives often said more about human fears and hopes than about solid evidence. They threaded together real mysteries, misunderstandings, and fiction into a single tapestry. For many people, that tapestry became the default lens for thinking about anything strange in the sky. In the last 2 decades, however, a different tone has entered the conversation. Instead of anonymous stories and grainy photographs, some of the most discussed cases have come from trained military pilots and advanced sensors. Video clips from fighter jets showed small shapes seemingly moving in odd ways against a cloudy background. Audio from the cockpits captured pilots reacting with surprise and even awe. These clips were later confirmed as authentic by defense officials, though their exact content and context remained murky. One well-known series of encounters took place off the coast of North America in the early 2000s. Navy pilots training near a carrier group reported seeing objects that appeared white and featureless, roughly the size and shape of a small craft, with no obvious wings or exhaust plumes. According to some accounts, these objects changed direction rapidly or seemed to hover against strong winds. Radar operators on the carrier and on an accompanying ship reportedly tracked targets in the same general area. Another set of recordings from later years showed small objects against the sky that appeared to dart, rotate, or slide rapidly across the field of view. Infrared cameras on the jets captured these scenes, and the videos were later released to the public after leaks and media reports. The official line described the objects as unidentified. That term did not mean alien. It meant that, given the data available, analysts could not confidently match them to any specific known craft or natural phenomenon. If you watch these clips online, it is easy to feel that you are seeing impossible performance, an object that seems to accelerate without inertia, a target that appears to move against the wind without visible means of lift. However, interpreting such videos is tricky. The cameras are mounted on fast-moving aircraft. They zoom, track, and stabilize in complex ways. Small optical or tracking effects can make an object seem to move in a direction or at a speed that does not match its actual path. Independent analysts, including experienced pilots and imaging specialists, have studied some of these videos frame by frame. In several cases, they have shown that a combination of camera motion, zoom level changes, and parallax can produce illusions of high acceleration where none exists. An object at a steady speed can appear to dart away simply because the tracking lock shifts. In other cases, the apparent rotation of the target can be traced to the design of the sensor itself, not to any real roll or spin in the sky. None of that proves that every military sighting has a simple explanation. Some incidents still involve odd radar returns, multiple witnesses, and flight profiles that do not yet have a fully agreed natural or conventional explanation in public reports. But it shows why caution is vital. The default assumption of many investigators is that unknown does not automatically mean exotic. It means there is not enough transparent data yet. Sometimes the missing pieces are locked behind classification. Sometimes they were never recorded at all. The rise of drones and other small unmanned vehicles has added another layer of complexity. Modern drones can be small, fast, and hard to see. They can loiter near training ranges or ships, buzzing in and out of radar coverage. In a world where military and intelligence agencies are constantly probing each other, it would be surprising if some unexplained contacts were not simply unknown, foreign or domestic systems. Weather balloons, research craft, and hobby devices also contribute to the clutter in the sky. Faced with this mix of real unknowns, likely misidentifications, and potential security concerns, governments have shifted their language. The old phrase, unidentified flying object, has given way in many official documents to unidentified anomalous phenomena. The new term is meant to be broader and less loaded. It covers not just things that fly, but any puzzling sensor readings in the air or even underwater. It also tries to strip away some of the cultural baggage that the older phrase carried. In recent years, defense officials in several countries have briefed lawmakers on these issues. Public hearings have featured pilots describing their encounters, intelligence officers explaining how reports are collected, and scientists urging more open data. New offices have been created to aggregate and analyze reports, with a stated goal of improving aviation safety and national security. Some of these briefings have been sober and cautious. Others have been wrapped in sensational headlines that promise more than the evidence can deliver. At the same time, a small number of whistleblowers and former officials have claimed that hidden programs exist which have recovered crashed craft or even non-human biological remains. These claims, if true, would represent a discovery of staggering importance. However, so far, they have been supported mainly by testimony and second-hand stories, not by publicly verifiable physical evidence. No materials have been shared in a way that independent laboratories can test and publish on. No clear images or samples have been released that survive basic scrutiny. Here, the same standard we applied to radio signals must apply again. Extraordinary claims need strong evidence that many different observers can examine. A small group of people saying that they have seen wondrous things in secure facilities is not enough. In the past, similar stories have surfaced around secret aircraft projects, only to later be explained by declassified technology or by misunderstandings. Secrecy breeds rumours. The more layers of classification involved, the easier it is for people to mistake one kind of silence for another. You might feel torn when you hear all this. On one hand, it makes sense that pilots and radar operators who see something they cannot immediately identify should report it without fear of ridicule. A responsible system should investigate such reports, if only to rule out hardware glitches or incursions by foreign craft.
On the other hand, it is also reasonable to demand that conclusions be based on robust data, not on excitement or fear. Holding both positions at once is not a contradiction. It is exactly the balance that good investigation requires. So how should we interpret unidentified sightings in the sky? The most conservative view is that they are a mixture of misperceptions, instrument artifacts, and human-made craft whose details are not widely known. A more open view leaves room for rare natural phenomena that we do not yet fully understand, such as unusual electrical discharges in the atmosphere or new kinds of plasma behavior. A small group of people prefers a third option, where at least some cases involve craft operated by non-human intelligences visiting or monitoring Earth. If you lean toward that third option, it is worth asking a few follow-up questions.
Why would a highly advanced civilization cross interstellar space only to play cat and mouse near military training areas, revealing itself just enough to be filmed on shaky cameras, but never enough to leave unambiguous physical evidence? Why would it appear mainly in places with heavy military and technological activity, which are also the very places where secret human systems are most likely to be tested? These questions do not prove anything either way, but they highlight the gap between a vague feeling that something is strange and a clear model of what visitors would reasonably do. None of this means that the topic should be mocked or dismissed outright. The skies are complicated, sensors have limits, human perception is fallible. Studying anomalies can teach us things about our own technology and environment.
At the same time, treating every unknown object as likely alien distracts from more immediate explanations and can erode trust in careful science.
Curious but grounded is a healthy stance. You can let yourself feel the pull of mystery while still asking tough questions. In a way, this whole debate is a concentrated version of the larger puzzle. We are confronted with a mix of noise, genuine unknowns, and strong emotions. We have to decide how much weight to give rare, ambiguous events. We have to decide what standard of proof to demand before concluding that something as profound as extraterrestrial visitation has actually happened. And we have to acknowledge that our own expectations and fears colour the way we interpret every blurry video and second-hand story. When you step back, you see that there are really two separate questions tangled together.
One is whether any of the reported anomalies in our skies are evidence that someone else has already come here. The other is why the galaxy at large appears so quiet when we scan it with telescopes and antennas. Even if every sighting turned out to have a mundane explanation, the wider silence would still need to be understood. Even if some sightings one day turned out to be real visitors, we would still need to ask why they behave the way they do. That second question pushes us into a different realm. It is less about rockets and radar and more about behavior and strategy. If there are many advanced civilizations in the galaxy, they must make choices about whether to reveal themselves, whether to broadcast loudly, whether to explore openly, or whether to hide. Those choices could be shaped by fear, by ethics, by game theory, or by simple indifference. To explore that space, we have to imagine not just alien bodies, but alien motives, and ask what kinds of stories might play out when many minds share the same cosmic stage. Once you start thinking about motives, one idea appears again and again in different forms. It says that the universe might be full of life, but that life is cautious. Every civilization that becomes aware of others faces the same problem. It does not know if the others are friendly or hostile. It does not know how powerful they are, or how they will react to new arrivals. In that fog of uncertainty, even a small risk can seem enormous when you remember that an entire world is at stake. Imagine yourself walking through a dark forest at night. You know there are other hunters out there, but you cannot see them clearly. You do not know whether they are carrying food to share or weapons to use.
You also know that any light you carry makes you an easy target.
In such a place, shouting your location feels reckless. Remaining quiet, hiding your fire, and watching from the shadows feels safer. This image has become a popular way to describe one possible answer to the Great Silence. In this dark forest picture, advanced civilizations are not absent, they are hiding.
They do not broadcast powerful beacons into space, not because they lack the technology, but because they have chosen not to. They may scan the sky, gather information, and map other stars quietly. They may even send probes that watch from a distance, but they rarely announce themselves openly, and they may react with extreme suspicion to anyone who does. From their point of view, a loud newcomer might be a danger waiting to grow. Game theory gives this fear a sharper edge.
If you imagine many players who cannot easily communicate or trust one another, and if each player has the power to harm the others, then cautious strategies often win out. Destroying a potential threat early can seem rational if the cost of being wrong is total loss. The fact that not every player would choose that path does not matter. The possibility that even one might behave that way is enough to create a climate of fear. You might find this picture chilling. It suggests that broadcasting strong signals into the galaxy could be like lighting a flare in that forest. At the same time, it raises uncomfortable questions about our own behavior. Humans have often been suspicious of unfamiliar tribes and nations. We have a long history of preemptive violence. When people imagine alien fears, they are often projecting a sharpened version of our own past onto the stars.
The dark forest is as much a mirror as it is a hypothesis.
There is also a quieter alternative. Maybe advanced civilizations are not hiding in fear, maybe they are simply indifferent. In this view, the galaxy could contain entities whose cognitive and technological scale dwarfs ours in the way our scale dwarfs that of ants. They might run projects on timescales of millions of years, slowly reshaping matter and energy across vast regions. A small, noisy civilization on a rocky world might be beneath their notice, the way a single anthill rarely factors into human city planning. You can feel the difference in tone between these two stories. In one, the silence is dangerous, full of hunters. In the other, it is more like the quiet background of a busy landscape, where we are too small to register. Yet both share a key idea. The absence of obvious signals does not prove the absence of others. It may simply reflect the fact that their goals and fears do not line up with our expectation of a friendly, obvious beacon. Another classic idea takes a more protective angle. It imagines that we are not ignored or hunted, but watched. In this picture, more advanced civilizations are aware of young species like ours and have decided to keep their distance. They might be following a rule that says, do not interfere with cultures that have not yet reached a certain level of development. They might worry that contact too early could disrupt our societies or overwhelm our sense of identity. People sometimes compare this to a zoo. Animals inside an enclosure are aware of their immediate surroundings. They see fences, trees, and other animals. They may even notice that food appears on a schedule, but they do not understand the wider world outside the walls. Visitors can see them clearly through the glass, but the animals do not fully grasp who is watching or why. In the cosmic version of this idea, we are inside the enclosure without realizing it. If that were true, what evidence might we expect? Perhaps very little. The whole point of a non-interference rule would be to avoid obvious signatures. Anything that looked like a direct message, a hovering ship, or a clear engineered structure would break the spell. Instead, the watchers would stay in orbits that our current instruments cannot resolve, or they would use technologies that blend into natural backgrounds. They might only step in under extreme conditions, such as when a young civilization threatens to destroy its own biosphere. You can hear an echo of our own ethics in this story. Humans debate when and how to contact uncontacted tribes on Earth. We argue about how to protect ecosystems while still learning from them. We have conservation zones and research reserves where interference is limited. It is easy to project that familiar pattern onto imagined galactic caretakers. The zoo idea may tell us more about our hopes for wise guardians than about any real policy followed by others. A fourth family of ideas takes yet another path. It suggests that advanced civilizations do talk to each other, sometimes forming networks or loose associations, but that we are not yet part of that conversation. The galaxy, in this view, might host something like a diplomatic community. Members could share information, coordinate large-scale projects, or agree on certain norms. One of those norms might be a rule about not advertising themselves to pre-contact worlds. In that scenario, the silence we hear is not an absence of communication.
but the result of a shared decision to be quiet towards species below a certain threshold. The threshold might be technological, such as the ability to detect and interpret faint signals. It might be ethical, such as showing stable cooperation and non-destructive behaviour on a planetary scale. Until a young civilization crosses that bar, it remains in a kind of quarantine, observed but not fully engaged. You might notice how this idea places our own development at the centre of the story. It turns the question around. Instead of asking why no one has contacted us, it asks whether we would be ready for contact if it happened. Would we respond with unity or with conflict? Would we treat the news as a chance for growth or as a threat? These questions are not just speculative, they touch real debates about how much effort we should put into sending messages outward versus listening quietly. All these stories share a common challenge. They are hard to test. The dark forest hypothesis, the zoo idea, and the galactic network picture are each consistent with a wide range of observed quiet skies. They mainly differ in their assumptions about the psychology and culture of species we have never met. That does not make them useless. Thinking through their implications can help us clarify our own values and strategies, but we should be careful not to mistake them for firm conclusions. There is also a danger that creeps in when we tell these tales. Because we have only one example of intelligence, our own, we tend to use human history as the template for everything. We look at our wars and imagine hostile aliens. We look at our ethical progress and imagine gentle guardians. We look at our politics and imagine councils among the stars. Each time, we risk building an elaborate mirror and calling it a window. That does not mean we should stop imagining. It means we should hold our stories lightly and keep checking which parts are grounded in physics and which are pure narrative. Physics tells us that resources are limited, that energy and matter are valuable, that information has costs. Those constraints encourage competition as well as cooperation. They make both fearful hiding and patient sharing plausible. Beyond that, we are extrapolating from a single cultural data point. There is another way to use these hypotheses that ties more directly to our current behaviour. Instead of asking which story is true, we can ask which one we want to act as if it is true. If you truly believe that broadcasting loudly into the galaxy might trigger hostile attention, you would be cautious about certain types of messaging. If you believe that joining a network of civilizations requires showing that you can cooperate internally, you might use that as a motivation to reduce conflict at home. In this sense, our beliefs about others become self-fulfilling in small ways. If we see the universe as a dark forest filled with threats, we may become more militarized and secretive. If we see it as a community waiting for us to grow up, we may invest more in peaceful exploration and diplomacy. The actual truth may be neither of these pictures, yet the stories we tell ourselves guide our choices long before we know how accurate they are. There is also a more unsettling possibility. Perhaps there is no single dominant pattern. Different regions of the galaxy might have different cultures and histories. Some groups might be cautious and hidden, others might be expansive and open. Still others might have risen and fallen long ago, leaving only faint traces. The current quiet we experience could be a temporary lull, a local outcome of many overlapping waves of activity over billions of years. If that is the case, then our own emergence is happening in a complex landscape that we do not yet see. Our first clear detection of another civilization, if it ever comes, might not be a friendly greeting, but a fragment of a much larger story. It could be a long-dead beacon, still flashing automatically. It could be a warning message sent from one group to another in some distant conflict. It could even be a kind of cosmic art, a structure or signal whose purpose we do not immediately understand. As we think through these scenarios, one quiet thread keeps returning. No matter which story you favour, our actions are the one part of the puzzle we can control. We decide whether to become loud or stay quiet. We decide whether to treat our own biosphere kindly or harshly. We decide whether to build technologies that can sustain our civilization for the long term or weapons that can end it quickly. Those choices will shape whatever role we eventually play in the larger drama, whether we ever meet others or not. You can feel this more concretely if you imagine a timeline. Right now, we have had radios and rockets for only a short time. If we manage to avoid self-destruction, we could have millions of years ahead of us. During that stretch, we might become a spacefaring species that spreads into our own solar system and beyond. We might change our own biology or merge with our machines.
We might build structures that are visible from far away. In that future, we are not just worrying about others, we are becoming the kind of presence that others might worry about. Seen from that angle, the alien question becomes a mirror for our ethics. If we are uneasy about the idea of powerful strangers visiting Earth and reshaping it according to their needs, we might ask how we would behave if we found a world with simple life and no technology. Would we shield it, exploit it, or ignore it? If we would be offended by careless broadcasting that disturbs young civilizations, we might ask how careful we would be with our own powerful tools. There is also a softer, more hopeful way to frame this. The fact that we do not yet know what others are like gives us a chance to decide who we want to be before anyone is watching. We can choose to build a civilization that we ourselves would be glad to meet. One that values curiosity over conquest, empathy over fear, and long-term thinking over short-term gain. Whether or not anyone else is out there, those values make sense for us. In that sense, every story we tell about galactic forests, zoos, or unions is also a story about human potential. We are sketching possible futures, testing them for coherence, and deciding which ones feel worth aiming at. The silence of the sky gives us room to choose. It does not force us into a single path. It simply reflects our signals back at us, or keeps its own counsel, while we work out what kind of species we want to become. Sooner or later, though, the thought returns. What if contact does happen? Maybe we find microbes under an icy crust in our own solar system. Maybe a telescope detects a clear atmospheric fingerprint of complex life on a distant world. Maybe a signal appears in our data that passes every test and refuses every natural explanation. In that moment, all our stories about how others might behave will collide with a new, urgent question. The question will not just be what they are like, it will be what we do next. How we respond, how we communicate, how we change our societies, and how we look at ourselves in the mirror of another mind will matter as much as the discovery itself. Every choice we make then will echo forward, shaping our path for generations. If you want to be ready for that day, the time to start thinking is now, while the sky is still silent and the decisions are still ours alone. One way or another, if we keep looking, the day will come when the question, "Are we alone?" stops being hypothetical. Maybe the answer arrives in a lab, when a scientist peers into a microscope and sees something moving in a sample from an alien ocean. Maybe it arrives as a pattern in a radio telescope, a sequence of numbers or pulses that refuses every natural explanation. Maybe it arrives when one of our own craft, centuries from now, drops into orbit around a distant world and sees lights on the night side. However it happens, that moment will force us to decide not just what we believe, but what we do. The gentlest version of contact might be the discovery of simple life close to home. Picture a probe drilling into the ice of Europa, Enceladus, or another icy moon, melting its way down to a dark ocean. Sensors sample the water and send back data. At first it is just numbers on a screen, spikes and curves. Then someone realizes that the molecules and structures in that sample are not random. They store information, they copy themselves, they are evolving. We have found a second genesis of life in our own backyard. In that scenario, the questions come fast. Do we keep going deeper, risking contamination? Or do we pull back to protect this new biosphere? Do we treat that ocean as we once treated untouched forests, a storehouse of resources to exploit, or as a place with its own right to exist? There will be pressure from curiosity, from industry, from politics. Some will argue that studying alien microbes up close could revolutionize medicine or technology. Others will argue that we have no right to blunder into a world that has taken billions of years to form. Planetary protection rules already wrestle with these dilemmas in a limited way. When we send landers to Mars or elsewhere, we sterilize them as best we can. The idea is simple: do not ruin the very thing you are trying to study.
If we ever confirm living ecosystems under alien ice, those rules will feel much more urgent. You can imagine future generations debating whether to build permanent research stations, to leave entire worlds as protected reserves, or to seed them with our own organisms in some kind of misguided attempt to terraform. Even if all we ever find are microbes, the philosophical impact would be huge. A second origin of life would tell us that biology is a common outcome when conditions are right. It would nudge the early terms in our mental Drake equation toward higher values. We would know that the universe can roll the dice twice and get chemistry that wakes up. That alone would make you look at every star with different eyes. A different kind of contact could arrive from much farther away. Imagine that a future space telescope spends years staring at a nearby sun-like star. It watches as a small planet passes in front again and again, and it measures the starlight filtering through the planet's atmosphere. One day, the data show a combination of gases that should not coexist in stable amounts unless something is constantly mixing them. Perhaps a high level of oxygen paired with methane. Perhaps some other complex pattern that screams out of equilibrium. We would be too far away to visit. No rover would roll across that planet's surface in our lifetimes. Yet we would know that something remarkable is happening there. The oceans, clouds and rocks are being reshaped by living processes. Storms and seasons carry hints of vast cycles we can only model from a distance. Some of us would want to send a message immediately. Others would urge patience. What do you say to a world you can see but not reach? In that case, any communication would be painfully slow. A beam of radio or laser light would take years or centuries to arrive. A reply, if it ever came, would take just as long. A single exchange might span generations. That would change the way we think about conversation. Instead of quick back and forth, we would be writing letters whose recipients might not even be born yet. Our first message would have to speak for more than one moment. It would have to represent who we are, who we hope to be, and what we think is safe to reveal. There is an even sharper scenario. A radio telescope picks up a narrowband signal that repeats in a clear, structured way. Multiple observatories confirm it. The signal changes over time, perhaps encoding simple mathematical patterns or images. It comes from a specific star. We check every possible natural explanation, every instrumental quirk, every source of interference. Nothing fits. The scientific community, cautious after decades of false alarms, finally agrees. This is not a pulsar or a flare. This is a deliberate transmission. It is hard to overstate how disruptive that realization would be. Overnight, the question of whether we are alone would be settled. Religions would interpret it through their own lenses, some with joy, some with anxiety. Markets would wobble as people tried to guess what it meant for the future. Nations would argue over who gets to respond and what the message should say. For a time, the usual divisions between countries might blur as humanity realizes that, at least in one sense, we are all on the same side of a bigger divide. We sometimes imagine that scientists and governments have a detailed plan ready for this. In reality, existing protocols are modest. They say things like, verify the signal, share the data openly, and do not respond on behalf of everyone without international consultation. They do not contain a perfect script. No committee can fully anticipate the mix of awe, fear, hope, and opportunism that would erupt when millions of people learn that someone else is talking. At some point, though, the arguments would have to give way to a decision. Do we answer? If so, how much do we tell? Do we describe our planet's location precisely, or speak in more general terms? Do we talk mostly about math and physics, or do we also mention art, stories, and the messy parts of our history? Whatever we send will be shaped by our fears and aspirations in that moment. It will also be a time capsule. By the time any reply reaches us, our own world may have changed beyond recognition. There is another path that often gets less attention because it feels slower and less dramatic. Instead of someone else reaching out to us first, we might be the ones who arrive. If we survive our current challenges and continue to develop, we may eventually send probes and crewed missions to other stars. Along the way, we might find planets with simple life but no technology. We might even find worlds where evolution has climbed toward intelligence
but has not yet built radios or telescopes. In that situation, we would face the same ethical questions we now project onto hypothetical elders watching us. Do we leave young biospheres alone, or do we reshape them to suit our needs? Do we treat them as living museums, laboratories, or future homes? The history of exploration and colonization on Earth is not encouraging.
Too often, more powerful cultures have exploited less powerful ones, justifying it as progress. If we carry that pattern into space, we could become exactly the kind of threat we currently fear. Some scientists and philosophers have argued that we should adopt strong rules before we ever get that far. Rules that say, for example, do not interfere with native life unless absolutely necessary. Rules that treat planets with independent biospheres as treasures to be studied carefully, not terraformed casually. Rules that draw a sharp moral line between uninhabited rocks and living worlds. These ideas echo current discussions about planetary protection, but they extend them into a future where our reach is much greater. There is a quieter side to this as well. Even if we never find complex life elsewhere, we may still spread through our own solar system. We might build habitats in orbit, on the Moon, on Mars, in the icy realms beyond. Each step will test whether we can live in new environments without repeating old mistakes. It will reveal whether we can build societies that are stable, fair, and curious over long spans of time. Those experiments will be part of our rehearsal for any eventual meeting with minds from elsewhere. Through all these scenarios runs one constant. Whatever we do outwardly, we are already broadcasting inwardly who we are. Our atmosphere carries the signatures of our industry, our energy use, and our environmental impact. A distant observer with good instruments could see that our planet is out of balance in ways that hint at a technological species. Our radio leakage, while faint, still forms a bubble that grows with each passing year. Even if we send no deliberate message, we have already left fingerprints on the sky. You might wonder what those fingerprints say. They show that we are clever enough to harness fossil fuels and change a planet's climate. They show that we have built global communication networks and constellations of satellites. They show that we are capable of both remarkable invention and dangerous short-sightedness. In a sense, any distant civilization studying us would see a young species in the middle of a risky transition, one that could lead either to collapse or to a more mature, sustainable way of living. That transition is not just about carbon or technology, it is about how we treat one another. A message sent to another world will mean little if we cannot maintain trust and cooperation here. If we cannot avoid turning new tools into new weapons faster than we can build safeguards. If we cannot bring basic compassion to the way we handle differences within our own species. How we behave now, in everyday politics and culture, is part of our answer to the question of what kind of neighbour we would be. History offers a few hints about how profound perspective shifts can ripple through society. When we first realised that Earth orbits the Sun, not the other way around, it reshaped our place in the cosmos. When we saw photographs of our planet from space, a small blue sphere hanging in blackness, it changed how many people thought about borders and fragility. A confirmed detection of life or intelligence beyond Earth would be another such turning. It would force us to place our stories on a larger map. Some people fear that such a discovery would shatter religions or identities. Others suspect that most belief systems are resilient and would adapt, just as they have adapted to every other scientific revolution. Either way, the adjustment would take time. There would be waves of speculation, new cults, new narratives. But beneath that surface churn, a deeper, quieter change would be taking place. A change in how children learn to draw their place in the universe, how textbooks describe history, how languages frame the word we. In the face of such a vast possibility space, it is easy to feel powerless. You and I cannot personally steer a probe to another star or decide global messaging policy. But there are smaller, concrete ways in which our choices matter. The people who will one day write those messages and design those missions are shaped by the cultures we build now. They will carry forward the values we normalize today. The way we talk about strangers, about conflict, about responsibility, will echo in their decisions. You can test this on yourself. Imagine being in a room where the world has gathered to draft the first reply to a confirmed alien signal. Every sentence you propose would reflect not only what you think aliens should know, but what you wish were true about us. Would you be tempted to gloss over our wars and injustices? Would you want to highlight acts of kindness, cooperation, and creativity? That tension reveals the gap between who we are and who we would like to be. Bridging that gap is not just a matter for future diplomats, it is a daily practice. When we choose to solve disputes through dialogue instead of violence, we are rehearsing for how a mature civilization might handle conflict with beings it cannot fully understand. When we invest in science, education, and long-term projects, we are building the patience that any interstellar endeavor will require. When we protect ecosystems and species, we are learning how to carry life gently through a harsh universe. There is a risk in leaning too hard on the alien question as motivation. We should care about justice, sustainability, and compassion, even if the cosmos is utterly empty of other minds. But thinking about potential contact can add a new dimension to our ethics. It reminds us that our story does not happen in a vacuum. It unfolds in a universe that may contain other stories, some older, some younger, some tragically unfinished. Our choices determine whether we are a good ancestor, not only to our descendants, but possibly to our future neighbours. If we eventually become a spacefaring species that spreads beyond Earth, our legacy will not just be footprints and flags. It will be the patterns we leave in the matter around us, the atmospheres we alter, the orbits we fill with metal, the ecosystems we transplant or disrupt. From a distance, those patterns will be all anyone sees of us at first. They will be the clues from which others infer our character, just as we now infer the properties of unseen worlds from faint shadows and spectra. One day, perhaps, contact will move beyond data and signals into physical presence. A ship of ours might enter orbit around a living world and descend, or a craft from elsewhere might slow into our sky and land. In that moment, all the grand theories and thought experiments will collapse into concrete choices. Who steps forward? How we greet? Whether we come with open hands or clenched fists? Whether we listen more than we speak? That future is not guaranteed. The same tools that give us the power to explore also give us the power to destroy. Nuclear weapons, runaway climate change, uncontrolled artificial intelligence and other risks cluster around our species like the teeth of a trap. From the perspective of the Drake equation, this is one of the most uncertain terms. Can a young technological civilization stabilize itself, or do most snuff themselves out before they have a chance to become long-term members of the galactic community? We do not yet know the statistical answer. We only know that we are living through our own test. Each decade that we manage to navigate without catastrophe, each step we take towards safer energy, wiser governance, and more inclusive societies, nudges our personal estimate a little higher. We cannot control what has happened on countless other worlds. We can control whether our world becomes one more brief flare or a lasting light. There is a quiet courage in choosing hope here. Hope does not mean assuming that someone else will save us, whether they descend from the sky or beam us instructions. It means acting as if our efforts matter, even when the outcome is uncertain. It means building institutions that can survive individual lifetimes. It means caring for a planet you will never fully see restored, because you know others will live in the shade of the trees you plant. If we do manage to pass through this dangerous adolescence, the payoff is not just survival. It is the opportunity to step into the wider cosmos with eyes open, to explore nearby systems without desperation, to listen and speak with patience, to walk on other worlds without treating them as disposable, to look up at the night sky from many different surfaces and feel, each time, a mixture of humility and belonging. In the end, the alien question circles back to a simpler one. What does it mean to be a good civilization? Not a perfect one, because perfection is a story we tell, but one that learns from its mistakes, that extends its circle of concern, that tries to leave more possibilities open than it closes. Whether we ever meet others or not, that is a meaningful goal. If we do meet others, it may be the difference between being welcomed as a fellow explorer or recognized as a danger. Tonight, if you step outside and look up, the sky will probably seem as quiet as ever.
The Milky Way will arch overhead if you are lucky enough to see it. The familiar constellations will trace their old patterns.
Nothing in that scene will shout that the universe is full of neighbours, or that it is empty, or that someone is watching. The stars will simply shine, as they have for billions of years. Yet you carry something new when you look at them now. You carry the knowledge that the question of other minds is not just science fiction. It is a real, open problem tied to deep issues of physics, biology, and ethics. You carry the possibility that somewhere, perhaps unimaginably far away, another being is looking at their own sky and wondering similar things. And you carry the responsibility that comes from realizing that, for the moment, we are the only ones we know of who can ask these questions here. Perhaps someday a signal will arrive, or a probe will be found, or a microscope will reveal a swimming cell from an alien sea. When that happens, we will finally have company in the universe. But even before that day, we already have a task.
To become the kind of civilization that deserves to last, that treats its home with care, that greets the unknown with curiosity and courage rather than fear. In that work, every small choice matters, and the future of our species is the message we are writing, line by line, for the cosmos to read.